think we've all seen this kind of diagram before. But the first thing is, I want you to be able to actually draw this from the top of your head and not like buy it and look at it. And so all the information we need is here in these 4 notes. And it's because it's a really easy way to remember which natural notes are the ones that are beside each other, which are E and F and B and C. And all the other notes have a step in between. On piano, it would be a black key. I think that learning the way the strings work quickly becomes way less effort than constantly referring back to the chart. The in-between notes can take their name from either side, and so we can either say it's one above or one below. But since they don't have their own independent names, I think it's a little easier to sort of ignore them for now, because we use the natural notes to name them anyway, or at least do them at the end. Let's sit down with our guitars in hand and make a chart of all the notes. We also need to know the names of the open strings, and I want to show you something really powerful for memorizing the fretboard. Every time you pass one of the notes E, A, D, G, or B, take a moment to go play the corresponding open string. And actually that will be most of the notes. Now let me help you get started on making our note chart. We'll start on the note E over here in the little corner of our guitar, and we'll compare it to the other E string. And then we'll go up right next door to the first fret to find F. And then I'm going to skip one to get to G. And then we have a G string. And then there's the note A. And here's the A string. And then B, the B string. Here's a C. Now, I'm going to skip one to get to D again. Here's the D string. And then when I get to the 12th fret, I should get the same answer as the open string, which is E. Same as open. Same as that. So let's do the second string, which starts on B, and then B and C is our model of a half step. Then we're going to go up to D. D, I have another D string. Then I'm going to skip one to get to E, which I can kind of remember matches my other 2 E strings. F is right above that. I'm going to skip one to get to G, and then here's the G string. I'll skip one to get to A. Here's the A string. And then here's B on the 12th fret, which should always give you the same as open again. On the 3rd string, we have G, and that is the G string already. Here's the note A, which I can compare back to that. Here's the note B, which I have a B string. Here's a C right next door always. I'm going to skip one to get to D. Then here's the string. Here's E. Here's E strings. Here's F right next door to E. And G on the 12th fret. Same as open. Here's the D string. I'm going to skip one to get to E. Here's the other E strings. Here's an F. Here's the note G. Here's the G string. Here's the note A. Here's the A string. Here's B and the B string right next door to C. And then the note D on the 12th fret. Same as open. And then there's the note A. I skip one to get to B. There's a B string. Here's C right next door. Skip one to get to D. Here's the D string. Skip one to get to E. And then they've got the 2 E strings. F is right next door to E. I skip one to get to G, and then there's the G string. I skip one to get to the A, which is on the 12th fret, same as open. And then the two E strings match. So you could just copy your answer, but let's just count it out. I'm going to start on E, which is next door to F. There's my other E, by the way. Here's a G, and I'm going to play my G string. Then I get an A, and then I have my A string. Here's a B, B string, right next door to C. Then there's D, D string. And the 12th fret is E, which is where we started. And so that's how we make our chart. And we can either just copy this part of the neck up here again, or we can play up there as far as our guitar goes and explore that area too, but it just repeats the same pattern again. And then if you would like to, you can go between all the natural notes that we wrote and write in all of the accidental notes or the notes that have sharps and flats. And then my favorite way to really learn this is to just improvise along each string using the natural notes, just until you get a feel for it. Nothing can beat the experience of playing it and hearing it. I would recommend to use a backing track and either an A minor or a C major backing track. And for the sake of your ears, it is really good to try to do both A minor and C, and then just be extra aware of the location of that key's main note.